Hi, I'm Shana Meyerson with the Yoga of War podcast, here today for the 100th and final episode of the show. Tomorrow marks a new beginning and the launch of a brand new podcast, Unapologetically Jewish. But today, Ambassador Mark Regev marks the grand finale to the greatest show on earth, for me at least. An ambassador by nature, Mark is what I would consider to be the diplomatic counterpart to Ruthie Blum's undiplomatic leanings on their edgy JNS show, Israel Undiplomatic, a show that is uniquely informative and entertaining in the field. It is an absolute honor and a pleasure to have Mark and Ruthie on the Yoga of War podcast for my very special 99th and 100th episodes. I hope you had the chance to listen in on The World According to Ruthie, and today I am thrilled to present The World According to Mark. Ambassador Mark Regev is a former senior diplomat with more than 30 years of experience in foreign policy, including serving as Israel's ambassador to the United Kingdom. A leading strategic communications specialist, Mark has extensive experience representing Israel at the highest levels of government, including as a senior advisor to the Prime Minister and international spokesperson. Mark is recognized internationally as one of Israel's foremost public voices and co-hosts the JNS TV show, Israel Undiplomatic. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. I'm simply delighted to meet up with you again.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. So before we dive in, I'd like to ask about your transition from diplomacy to Israel Undiplomatic. What has it been like to shift from the discipline of diplomatic messaging to a format that lets you say anything you want, however you want?
So it can be a challenge, and I'm not sure I've totally come to grips with the transition, if I'm truthful with you. I mean, I worked for the Israeli government close to 30 years, okay? And for many of those years, as you said, I was in senior positions. I was the chief government international spokesperson. I worked with the prime minister. And then every word you choose, you are speaking for the government of Israel, and you have to be very careful with how you use your language. And if you do it for a long time, and I did it for a long time, it also becomes part of your personality.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember, once my wife would say to me something like, "How do I look? We're about to go out." And I'd say, "You look fine." And she said, "Don't be a diplomat. Tell me really what you think," right? So you can't do a job like if you're a doctor or a lawyer, it affects your personality. So when you're a diplomat, for a long time, it also affects you. And so coming out of that, no longer being the government spokesperson and wanting to say what I wanted to say. So at times I find it challenging. Especially, let's say, if I do an interview for a television station or so forth. So I always ask them to say at the beginning, I'm no longer the government spokesman, because part of the viewing audience views Regev always as the official voice of Israel.
Yeah.
And even though they say that, and I'm no longer, sometimes, especially if it's an aggressive anti-Israel interview, I think my automatic defense mechanism is to go back and to be the official spokesman again, even though I'm no longer. But it's a process.
Yeah. Well, you've mastered the process. I really have to say that your show is a masterpiece. So that being said, let's get into it. Just like with Ruthie, we're going to start off by talking really about wrapping up the war or the conversation on the war, knowing full well this war is not over. But to most of the viewing audience, I think they think it is. So let's talk about starting from really October 6th and before. Prior to the invasion on October 7th, 2023, Israel was honestly plagued with overwhelming judicial reform protests, filling the streets, disrupting life, and creating chasms within society. Do you think that this profound and highly publicized disunity played any role in emboldening Hamas to strike?
I have no doubt that it did. There were a number of factors, obviously, that led to October 7th. but we were having very vibrant political debates, as you rightly said. And Israeli society was polarized over judicial reform. And as you said correctly, there were literally tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people in the streets protesting the government. And our enemies, I mean, a democratic country like, America, Canada, Australia can look at Israel and say, okay, they've got a moment of polarized politics in a democracy. People are yelling and shouting at each other. But is it possible that our enemies saw the Israeli people divided and they saw it through their own non-democratic prism, and they said the Israelis are fighting with each other. This is a time when they've got their eye off the ball. And maybe we did take our eye off the ball. And I want to add something that I said at the time before October 7th. Part of the protest movement, I'm not saying the entire protest movement, but part of the protest movement started using the issue of military service.
Yes.
Which is a very powerful weapon. It's almost like going nuclear from an internal political point of view and saying, we will, or we are refusing to do our reserve duty any longer. We are no longer going to do that because as a protest measure, because we don't agree with the judicial reform. They would have said because we refuse to serve in an undemocratic state and so forth. That was their agenda. They said the political reform was the judicial reform was against democracy. I don't believe that, but they believed it generally. I remember a few people at the time were saying, not me, but other people were saying, I oppose judicial reform, but let's leave the army out of it because that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Mm-hmm. The minute you make military service and your reserve service part of a political struggle, so it's a powerful weapon internally, yes? The way, because military service is almost sacrosanct in Israel, right? But having said that, how did our enemies see that? So not only did they see a very polarized society, but they saw an Israeli army that, at least the way it was portrayed in the media and therefore seen by our enemies, is the army was having trouble because we're having all these people, important units, who are saying we're no longer serving or we're no longer about to serve. And all these reports, that the Air Force isn't up to par or the intelligence community isn't up to par. And for all these reasons, I have no doubt that the political polarization that we had in 2023 led up to, it was one of the factors, not the only factor. We can talk about other factors if you're interested, but was one factor that let Hamas believe that this was an opportune time to attack Israel. And if we look at their, for want of a better word, inverted commas, yes, their success in killing so many Israelis and storming across the border, massacring, maybe they were right. Maybe we did because we were so focused on our internal, disagreements. We did take our eye off the ball and weren't looking at what was Hamas doing on the other side of the border.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And when it comes to taking the eye off the ball, I mean, I think that most people would feel safe in arguing that the Israeli government and military definitely got complacent about Hamas on totally separate from the judicial protests. They were all but completely disregarding Hamas's capabilities to inflict any serious damage on the state. They took their eye off the ball. They got complacent. Did you?
So I have to tell you, I was one of those people that believed, I never believed we could make peace with Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought incorrectly, and I admit my mistake, I thought, and I wrote about this, a piece for the Jerusalem Post once, I thought it was possible to reach some sort of modus vivendi with Hamas on the assumption that every few years we'd have to use the overstated metaphor at the time, we'd have to mow the grass. In other words, we'd have a combination of carrots and sticks to try to keep the Gaza border relatively quiet. And how would we do that? No illusions that Hamas was suddenly going to, stop being an enemy. But by, on one hand, using military force every now and then to make sure they understood the price that they would pay if they attacked us. And so we had, every 2-3 years, we had a military operation against Hamas in Gaza. And we thought, that we called that mowing the grass, just, they understood. And at the same time, trying to provide positive incentives for them to keep the peace. So allowing more Gazans to work in Israel, economic incentives, other incentives, and so forth, so that you'd have a community in Gaza that would say, we have an interest in continuing the peace and quiet, not the peace, because it's Hamas, but a relative peace and quiet on the border. And I thought that's probably the best policy, and I was wrong.
Yeah.
I was wrong.
So
And many Israelis, I think, agreed with, what I was saying, especially, when people talked about the alternative of going into Gaza and taking out Hamas. It's a serious military operation. And I think there were many people who thought, well, that's only our last alternative and we're not there yet, so forth and so on. And so for all sorts of reasons, we adopted this policy of, as I say, mowing the grass, providing negative incentives and positive incentives for Hamas to keep the quiet. And of course, we were deluding ourselves. I was deluding myself.
Well, it was an incentive system that assumed that they had the same motivations and values as Western civilization, let's say, Israel. And I think that we've really woken up to the fact that that was the inherent flaw in the reasoning. Mark, where were you on October 7th? What was your personal experience?
So I can tell you exactly. I was out of government. I was on a leave of absence from government, teaching at a university. And you will recall October 7th was a Jewish holiday. And me and my wife had flown to Portugal to do a holiday there with my sister and brother-in-law who were visiting from Australia. And we did this like we were in Portugal for 4 days on just tourists. But we flew back on an overnight, what do you call it, a red-eye flight in the United States from Lisbon back to Tel Aviv on the Thursday night landing very early Friday morning. And why did we want to come back? Because you could say we were on holiday, we could have stayed for the weekend as well, yes? But we had a wedding in Jaffa. One of my closest friends, his daughter got married that early afternoon in Jaffa, and we wanted to be there. We came back early for the wedding. And there was this beautiful wedding, as I say, on the port in Jaffa, saw a lot of old friends, a very happy event, everyone's smiling, right? And me and my wife, because we were on the red eye the night before, we went to sleep very early on the Friday night. And on the Saturday morning, I woke up early because I thought I heard thunder. And I thought, October, Israel, thunder, right? It doesn't fit. So I thought maybe it's an airplane or something. And I came downstairs and, something wasn't right. So, I'm sort of half asleep still, woken up by what I thought is thunder. I turn on the TV to one of the Israeli news stations, and they say there are rockets being fired all over Israel. And at the beginning, I thought, this is strange. It was very quiet yesterday. Usually there's some sort of lead up, there's some sort of escalation of tension, and this came out of nowhere. From my perspective, from what I knew. And I make myself a coffee and I'm looking at the TV. And then there was after, as I said at the beginning, I thought more of the same. We have one of these operations against Gaza every couple of years, right? And then I think it was an hour, 2 hours into this, I saw a white pickup truck. What do you call them in America? You call them?
A white pickup truck.
Okay. I thought maybe that was an Australian term. But there was a white pickup truck in the middle of Sderot, one of the cities closest to Gaza. And these guys looking like ISIS guys. And I said, this isn't more of the same. This is something very, very different. And that was when the penny dropped at me, for me, saying, this is now, okay, it's something new. This is a new world we've just entered, right? It took me until I saw that picture, I thought this is just more of the same. I'd been the government spokesman for countless previous Gaza operations. Thought, okay, they're firing rockets, we'll fire back. There'll be a bit of fighting for a couple of days and it'll be over like in the past. And I was wrong, right? And when I saw that pickup truck in the middle of Sderot with the people looking like, with their headbands and RPG rocket-propelled grenade launchers and their, Kalashnikov AK-47s, I suddenly realized this is something very different. And as more and more news came in, I think we all understood this wasn't business as usual. And I remember that afternoon thinking, oh, I can't sit at home. The university was closed. I can't sit at home and do nothing while it's a war on. And so I sent a WhatsApp message, which, as you know, is the Israeli preferred way to communicate, to a friend in the Prime Minister's office and saying, look, and if you want me to come back and help out during the crisis, I'm happy to do so. And I didn't hear anything back. And I started saying to my wife, oh, I'm no longer relevant. I'm no longer necessary. How am I going to, make a contribution? I started thinking in my mind, how am I going to do something useful during the war? And the next day, I got a message from the Prime Minister's office. Why aren't I there already? That's how it works. And I'm not blaming anyone because it was the crazy first couple of
Of
days.
course.
But I went back and I worked for those first few months of the war. I worked in government again to try to help get the communications message abroad. We had a nice team we put together. And that's how the war hit me. Can I say, though, with your permission, I don't want to monologue, heaven forbid, and you have to interrupt me when you want to interrupt me. But when we're talking about the reasons for the war, so we talked about the internal polarization, okay? And the people, and that Hamas thought the army was falling apart because of whether it was falling apart or not falling apart, that's a different issue. But that Hamas thought, the army was falling apart, and that was like an incentive to attack. Two other reasons I want to add to why Hamas attacked us on October 7th, at least very briefly, because it's not only that. That's one factor, maybe an important factor, but two other factors. One is the fact that just before then, we had the UN General Assembly and the Saudi Crown Prince had said publicly that we were very close to a peace breakthrough. And I think for Hamas, who are, jihadis, for them, the idea that Saudi Arabia, which has a special status in not only in the Arab world, but in the Muslim world, because Saudi Arabia is the custodian for Mecca and Medina, yes? The two Muslim holy cities. I think the threat of peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, that's Hamas's worst nightmare. And I think that was also a contributing factor, that they wanted to start a war that would put that process of, possible peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. They wanted to kill that. And at least temporarily, they've been successful. And the other thing, and I say this to you because you're speaking to me from California, you're an American, yes?
Yes.
But this I didn't think of by myself. I heard this from a former Israeli intelligence official who said in an interview he thought the way Biden behaved towards Netanyahu was also a contributing factor. And let me explain why. It's a bit like our political divisions. I don't think that Biden did something deliberately to try to get Hamas to attack, heaven forbid. But you will remember that in 2023, Biden took a side in the argument inside Israel on judicial reform. And he'd be getting out of the helicopter and all the White House journalists would be saying to him, are you going to invite Netanyahu to the White House? And he said, no. Right? And this happened like 2 or 3 times. So I knew, as someone who follows these things very closely, I knew this was politicking and this was, Biden was appealing to his Democratic base, who probably don't like the prime minister. They see him as a Jewish Donald Trump, yes? And he was playing to the left in Israel and to the left in America. And I understand why he was doing this. But once again, you have to ask, how did Hamas see that?
Yes.
They saw, to use an Obama word, they saw a lot of daylight between Jerusalem and Washington. And they said, so you combine, in Hamas's eyes, right? I'm not saying this is true. I'm saying this is how Hamas saw the reality.
Sure.
They saw Israel imploding internally and the Israeli army maybe fracturing because of the crisis, over the people refusing to serve. 2, they were scared, also almost in an existential way, that Saudi Arabia is about to make peace with Israel. And 3rd, they say, America and Israel aren't as close as they used to be. Israel is isolated. This is the time to attack. And I think if we look at the disaster that led, that broke out on October 7th, the massacre, all the terrible things, I think they're the 3 main reasons why we saw what we had.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is true. It's funny because as an American, I've followed Biden for decades. And I do think that at his core, if you were to cut his open and count the rings, he actually is a or was, I don't know where his mind is now, a bona fide Zionist. But there were extraordinary pressures from his base, and the words that were coming out of his mouth, the whole war, even when he feigned solidarity, that pandered to all of the libels that were going around about, and it's still going on now to an extent with Trump about, oh, well, there hasn't been enough aid. Well, yes, there is. 3,000 calories a day is enough aid. It's being hijacked, and that there was no pushback from Biden on these narratives, or he even went so far as to reinforce them, he and in Kamala Harris and the administration, throughout the war. And it's true that messaging is incredibly damaging. We're facing a war of words as much as we're facing a kinetic war these days. So as long as we're on the topic of hot politics, let me just ask you a quick question. If the atrocities of 10/7, did they change the way that you viewed the prospects of peace with the Palestinians, or did you always feel the same way when you say peace and quiet versus peace? It sounds like this has always been how you've seen it, but did October 7th move you at all to the right, like it seems to have for most of Israel?
Yeah. I'm not exceptional that way. I definitely moved to the right. And I said before, right, I admit that I was the idea that we could somehow manage living next to Hamas. I think most Israelis probably agreed with it too.
Yeah.
And Ruthie, though, will tell you that she didn't. Yes, I'm sure she did last week.
Yeah.
But I definitely, October 7th affected me, first of all, because two main things. Okay. One, the idea that you can provide economic incentives and buy off jihadists is just not true, right?
Right.
And that's not going to work. And there were some very, very sad stories, like, and I'm sure you've covered this on your podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like when Hamas terrorists entered the kibbutzim in southern Israel, right? They often knew which house to go to and where the guns were and where,
Right.
And it's because the Palestinian workers from Gaza who were working in these kibbutzim, obviously when they came back to their homes after a day's work in Israel, either voluntarily or through force, because Hamas ultimately runs a very authoritarian terror regime inside Gaza for the Palestinians themselves, were giving all this information. Yep. And maybe they wouldn't have been allowed to work in Israel had they not been working also for Hamas, giving them the intel, right?
Yep.
And so there are many sad stories. There's also stories, because let's be frank, the kibbutzim on the border with Gaza that suffered the most, kibbutzim tend to be left of center. And there were many people, who were part of the protest movement, who were part of the peace movement in Israel, very critical of the government of Israel. And Hamas, when they came and stormed across the border, they didn't ask people what's your position on judicial reform. They didn't ask you if you like Netanyahu or don't like Netanyahu. They didn't ask you if you agree with the two-state solution or not. They'd killed you. They beheaded you. They raped you. They burnt you, right? Burnt you alive. And so for me, once again, what is Hamas? What are they all about, right? And the idea that we can manage the problem that we were trying to do. We always knew who they were, but the idea that we could manage it, right? That for me was a eureka moment. Mm-hmm. I don't think, once again, I had illusions about Hamas, about that we could make peace with them. But the idea that we could somehow manage the situation, I believed, and I was wrong. And then the biggest surprise, though I shouldn't have been surprised, that's the wrong word, because it was to be expected. But the so-called moderate Palestinians on the West Bank, that they could not condemn October 7th. On the contrary, they justified it. I remember when I used to go on TV in those first months of the war, they'd have the official Palestinian, the PA ambassadors to different countries around the world, or their representatives, and they'd get on the television and they'd just attack Israel. Not a single word of criticism of they justified basically October 7th. And public opinion polls done by Palestinian pollsters, yes, not something that Israelis did, showed overwhelming support in the 70-something% of Palestinians on the West Bank, not under Hamas control, supported the October 7th. And I think it was a wake-up call about Palestinians, right? Mm-hmm. That they're just not ready for any peace and reconciliation. I'd say the following to you, okay? Today, support for a two-state solution in Israel is probably the lowest it's ever been since Oslo, right? Even the Israeli center-left doesn't want to talk about it. Even the Israeli left will only talk about it if you force them to talk about it, yeah? But the idea of Palestinian statehood is dirt in Israel, and it didn't used to be like that. There used to be a huge camp of people who believed it, and it's gone. And why? Because no one in Israel believes today that the Palestinians are a genuine partner in peace. And you've got to remember, I mean, we've been talking a lot about the Jewish communities, the kibbutzim and the cities on the border with Gaza. But our largest border with the Palestinians is on the West Bank. And as you know, Israel at its narrowest point is 9 miles wide in the Netanya area, right? And you have a border there. Now, what is the nightmare of Israelis is that where they live, the Palestinians will also, run across the border, storm the border, and start killing people. We have in my house, where I'm speaking to you now from, we've got, like all Israelis, it's part of the building code since the war against Iraq and the Scud missiles falling in Israel. We've all got safe rooms.
Right.
Whereas, when you get your, the sirens go off, you go to your safe room, according to what the home command tells you how to be, But we never had a lock on our safe room.
Right.
Where I live, because there was no need for a lock. You closed it, right? The missiles would fall, hopefully not near you, right? Or the Iron Dome would take them out before they landed, and you'd come out when the all clear was. After October 7th, I was off at the Prime Minister's office working. My wife had a technician here, not a technician, some guy who was good at these things. He was doing it voluntarily for the whole community because we live not far from the border either. And giving our door a lock that you could lock it on the inside. So if Hamas terrorists came into your house, you'd have it. And what happened in the Regev family happened in thousands, if not tens of thousands of families across Israel. And the whole idea that we're going to trust these people to have an independent state right on our border. And I want to say something. If you read some of the, convention, if I'm monologuing, you say, Mark, shut up, yeah?
No. I love it. I love the monologue.
If you read some of the stuff that I used to read when I was the ambassador in the UK, right? Some of the editorials, the silly Israelis, right? This is I'm paraphrasing what they say. They might write it in better English than I'm saying now, yeah.
Yeah.
But the silly Israelis just don't get it. All they have to do is take down the settlements, go back to the 1967 borders, right? Give the Palestinians their freedom, right? And we'll all live happily after. That's a narrative. That's a narrative that's been very strong. And the silly Israelis don't understand that because there's a solution. All you have to do is press this magic button. And you will have peace. Now, what's the trouble? According to that theory,
there wouldn't have been a war in 67, first of all.
First of all, yeah, what was that all about? But according to that theory, our border with Gaza should be our most peaceful border. What did Ariel Sharon do in 2005? He took down all the settlements. He took down every last settlement in Gaza. And the settlers who didn't want to leave, what did he do? He forced them to leave, right? The police and the army came in and forced them to leave. They were given compensation, but still they were forced to leave their homes. And what border did we return to? What line did Israel redeploy to? The 67 line. And I would say to our Western critics, those people who claim people who are anti-Semitic, I don't have to worry about. But there are a lot of genuine people who think, just this is best for Israel. A John Kerry type approach. This is saving Israel. You've got to go back to the Green Line and take down the settlements, right? So I would answer after October 7th, been there, done that. That's exactly what we did in Gaza. We took down all the settlements and we went back to the 67 line. And how did Palestinian society respond to that?
Intifada.
And I would say one more thing, with your permission.
Yeah.
Imagine the hypothetical possibility of the following. If on October 8th, President Mahmoud Abbas on the West Bank, right, Abu Mazen, did a huge big press conference in Ramallah and say, we want our independence, we want our freedom. But what Hamas did on October 7th yesterday was disgusting, and I condemn it. The Palestinian struggle should not involve killing innocent civilians beheading, raping. I condemn Hamas. That's not the way to act. That's not the way to a Palestinian state. If he would have said that unequivocally on October 8th, 2023, maybe a lot of Israelis would think we had a peace partner on the West Bank. But he refused to do it. And a month later, he still refused to do it. And a year later, he refused to do it. Now he's done it maybe privately when Europeans come and ask him, but publicly to his own people, he's refused to do it.
Yeah.
So do we have a peace partner, someone who we can just withdraw and live happily after with? I don't think so. Not
Absolutely
today.
not. Absolutely not. Mark, one of the points about the settlements that I like to bring up that very few people happen to mention is that not only are the Palestinians insisting on a right of return, meaning that all Arab, whatever, Palestinians should be able to come back to Israel, but that Israel is already 20% Arab Muslim with full and equal rights. The Palestinian territories are 0% Jewish, meaning zero. But here's the thing that people have to understand. If settlements are such a threat, the implication is, not the implication, clearly they stated out loud, that there are places in this world, and specifically surrounding Israel, where Jews are not allowed to live. This is a standard that would never be imposed on any other group anywhere on earth for any reason, but is taken as a given that the very presence of Jews is a criminal offense. If you are in the Middle East, in the areas surrounding Israel, not just Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, East Jerusalem, but also many nations on the broader scope. These are standards that would never, to say that just having people present and then to accuse Israel of being the apartheid state, the irony cannot be understated. But Mark, I do have a question listening to you. You refer to Judea and Samaria as the West Bank. Interesting choice. Why?
No, just out of habit, yeah. But I can use the terms. I can use the terms interchangeably, right? West Bank. Often I find when I speak to international audiences, that's what they call it. So I don't want to confuse them. But you're right. It's Judea and Samaria. It's part of the historic Jewish homeland. I have no doubt about that. I want to take up.
Wait, hold on one second, because words do matter, Mark. You are a diplomat, and even in America, Rubio and others are trying to get the terminology officially changed to Judea Samaria. Is this not the official terminology of, I know you're no longer a representative of, say, the prime minister's office or the state. You are now like a fully independent, undiplomatic Israeli. But does Israel not think that the words Judea and Samaria are important to this narrative?
So Israeli leaders over the years have used the words also interchangeably, but maybe maybe we should make a bigger effort to say Judea and Samaria, right? I think maybe that's important.
Yeah.
And I take your point. Can I tell you something? Over the years, both when I was in government and when I was out of government, I went to all these track 2 dialogues with our neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And I often met a moderate Palestinian who would say to me something like this, and I wanted you to think about this. He would say to me the following: Mark, I know the Jews suffered badly in Europe. Now, by saying that, of course, he's distancing himself from Hamas and other extreme elements, including in Fatah, who are Holocaust deniers or say the Jews are exaggerating. He said, I know the Jews suffered in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
But why? His words, of course, not mine. But he asked me, but why did Europe have to solve its Jewish problem? Once again, his words, not mine.
Right.
At my people's, he's saying, my Palestinian people's expense. Now he's telling me, I understand you suffered in this, right? But he's actually saying something. He's trying to be nice to me, right? I understand you people suffer. But what is he really saying? And this is the fundamental problem of the problem we have here. It's not about territory. It's not about partition and divide. But the minute he says, I stole his land, right? Doesn't matter if I'm willing to give back 50% or 80% or 95%. If he believes his land is stolen, he's saying to me the Jewish state in any borders is illegitimate.
Sure.
And this is a moderate Palestinian, right? Now, he's also wrong on the history. And this isn't talked about enough, but maybe I can spend 30 seconds on your program talking about this. The whole idea in the Palestinian narrative and what is said, too often on, university campuses in North America and in Western Europe, it's the Palestinians are the victims.
Mm-hmm.
And the terrible Israelis came and stole their land or whatever, right?
Right.
So first of all, to ignore the Jewish connection to the land is to ignore his history and civilization, and it's almost anti-Semitic. I would say it's anti-Semitic to ignore the Jewish connection to the land. Where does the word Jew come from? Judea. Exactly. Where did Jews come from? That's where we came from. That's where we always had a connection, right? But the Palestinians to say, we know you suffered in Europe. Hello? Where were the Palestinian leadership in the years of the Second World War? They were like neutral observers. They were fighting the Nazis.
No, they were sitting in the office shaking
their
their
official
hands.
Palestinian leadership was pro-Nazi, and the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who was the recognized leader of the Palestinian national movement at the time, tried to make pro-Axis revolutions in Iraq, failed, fled to Berlin, where he spent his time trying to get Bosnian Muslims to join a Waffen-SS division and being quite successful at it. And then after the war, he was indicted for war crimes at the Nuremberg trial, managed to escape, shows up in Gaza, and is elected president of what they call the All-Palestine government, president. And so when Palestinians say to me, we know you suffered in Europe, hello, where were you? You were telling the British, don't let Jewish refugees into the mandatory Palestine. That's what you were saying. You were putting pressure on the British, keep the Jews in Europe for them to get massacred. So don't give me crocodile tears about, very sad, Jews were massacred in Europe. Take responsibility for your own history.
Sure.
Throughout Europe, the Germans had to do it immediately. The French, had to, a while before they could talk about Vichy openly and talked about how there was collaboration with the Nazis. The Austrians only maybe in this century, because until recently they were occupied and only afterwards did they admit their part in Nazi crimes. Why can't the Palestinians also say our leadership in those terrible years of the Jewish Holocaust wasn't just neutral like the Irish. They were actively pro-Axis.
Well, when you say why can't they, I assume that's a rhetorical question.
Of course. And then I will say the following, we have coming up Israel Independence Day, yes? And we will celebrate this year, let's do the math, 1948 to 2026, when we are celebrating 78 years of Israel. Am I correct in my math? I was never good at math. That's why I became a diplomat. But I always ask the following question. Once again, it's a rhetorical question. We're celebrating 78 years to an independent Israel. Why are we not celebrating in parallel 78 years to an independent Palestine?
Because they rejected a state when they were offered it.
Yes. Who said no? The UN resolution of 29th of November 1947 called for the creation of two states. Now, Israel wasn't happy with the partition resolution. It didn't give us Jerusalem. It only gave us half of the Galilee. There were reasons there, but we said a small Jewish state is better than no Jewish state. What did the Palestinians say?
No state, no negotiations, no peace.
All or nothing. And guess what?
They got nothing.
So it's very easy for Palestinians and their friends around the world to say it's all Israel's fault. It's all Israel's fault. But once again, why are we not going to be celebrating 78 years to an independent Palestine? It's all Israel's fault. That's the what's it called? That's the automatic pilot thing, but it's not history.
Well, the other thing that sort of gets left out of this equation is Jordan. Okay, so originally the original British partition plan was actually going to give Transjordan, Israel, what we think of modern day Israel, including the Gaza Strip, Judea, Samaria, and Jordan, which is massive, was all supposed to be the Jewish state. Now, I could argue that the fact that the Palestinians, which didn't exist, not at least in the fashion that we think of them today, this was a creation of Arafat in the 60s, the concept of the Palestinian people, but for lack of a better term, that the Palestinians got Jordan, they got Lebanon, which is teeny tiny, of course, but Jordan is immense. And so I will argue that though they did not get a state in the state of Israel because they rejected it, they got a massive state in neighboring Jordan.
So you're historically correct, but I want to tell you where I disagree with you. You're historically correct. When the League of Nations, not just the British, the League of Nations creates a mandate for Palestine to create a Jewish national home, it includes all the territory of current Jordan. So basically, the then organized international community made a decision saying that what is today Israel, Gaza, Judean Samaria / West Bank, and the Kingdom of Jordan is the area for the Jewish national homeland, right? And then very shortly afterwards, in the early 1920s, there was a decision taken by the British, and they took out the area east of the Jordan River, was taken out of the mandate for Palestine as part of the Jewish national home. That was a unilateral British decision. Part of the Jewish leadership was very opposed to that. But let's be frank, and this is where I disagree with you. I don't think anyone in Israel today seriously thinks that Jordan is somehow going to become, part of our state. And I think as to what, we've got a peaceful relationship with Jordan, and now I'm putting on my diplomatic hat, King Hussein made peace with us in 1994. We're not entirely happy with the level of peace and cooperation we get from Jordan, but we want that peace to continue. I mean, our longest border with any neighboring country is our border with Jordan. If you can think of the map from the Sea of Galilee in the north down to Eilat Aqaba in the south, it's a peaceful border. And I wouldn't want to say anything that would give ammunition to radicals in Jordan that somehow Israel is about to take over their country because
Okay, let me interrupt, Mark, because I think you're referencing another ambassador who spoke very boldly in I thought a little bit oddly with Tucker Carlson, definitely off base when he said that he would be happy for Israel to have the whole God-given land, right, which includes Jordan. That is not what I was saying. What I was saying, just to clarify, because I also dropped my teeth when Mike Huckabee said that. I think he was speaking facetiously, but I'm not saying that Israel would take it over now. What I'm saying is that with the partition being what it is, the Palestinians did get a state. They didn't get the Holy Land that is the holiest land of the Jews, but they got Jordan. They already got it. I'm not saying that Israel should or wants it back. What I'm saying is that it's not like all of these people suddenly had no home, and they were offered citizenship in the Jewish homeland if they decided to stay there. I mean, it really was not as simple as we get nothing because we rejected this partition. They really did. I mean, ironically, of course, for all intents and purposes, there are millions of Palestinians in Lebanon, in Jordan, who are living in actual real life refugee camps, wherein in Israel they could accept full citizenship. So again, the irony doesn't end.
I would also add to the irony with your permission.
You have my permission.
There was the War of Independence, okay? Yes. And in the Jewish parts of mandatory Palestine, in other words, the parts that became the state of Israel until 1967, there was an Arab minority that was given full citizenship, right?
Right.
In the parts that became Jordan, what became called then the West Bank of Jordan, Judea and Samaria, and Gaza, which was under Egyptian control, there were no Jews whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
right? So who did the ethnic cleansing?
Exactly.
There were Jews living in the old city of Jerusalem since biblical times. Jerusalem has a Jewish majority for centuries. And yet that old city of Jerusalem was under Jordanian control,
Mm-hmm.
and all the Jews had to leave. While inside Israel, it's true, many Palestinian Arabs left because of the fighting and they were scared, and that we understand, yes. But there nevertheless was a thriving Arab Muslim community in Israel. And today, as you said correctly in the introduction, today they make up 20% of Israeli citizens are Arab Israelis.
Mm-hmm.
And even more than that, there are all these discussions now, we're having elections this year in Israel.
Yes.
And there's discussion, there are Arab nationalist political parties. One's more Islamist, one's more secular. There's one that's the Communist Party, one's more Ba'athist, and they're talking about uniting to form a united Arab list. And everyone's saying how the Arab vote could affect the outcome of the Israeli election. And all these people who talk about Arab Israelis somehow being in an apartheid state and being discriminated against and so forth.
Right.
And I'm sure we've got gaps in Israel, yeah? But if you think of an Arab population in the Middle East that enjoys democratic rights, let's be frank, that's only the Arab population of Israel. There's not a single other Middle Eastern country, right?
Mm-hmm.
No member of the Arab League, as far as I know, unfortunately I say this, but it's a fact, not one of them has a democratic system, a real democratic system.
That's true. That's
and
true.
so the Arab Israelis are the only Arabs in the Middle East who actually live in a democracy.
And we could talk ourselves blue in the face about this because we know that it's fact. The problem is that facts don't matter anymore. All you have to do is listen to Tucker Carlson's opening monologue yesterday. Not a single word of truth came out of his mouth. And people just accept that as fact. And then you wonder why the world thinks that Israel is the worst country on earth. And it's because, again, facts don't matter in a post-factual world. But Mark, I want to sort of pivot back a little bit to the war, if that's okay, the current war. I want to ask, so going back to the October 7th invasion, I'm wondering, in your opinion, how do you think that this invasion was able to occur at all, and why was the IDF so uncharacteristically unprepared and devastatingly late to respond?
Because it was almost a perfect storm. I said before, Israel as a country took its eye off the ball, okay? And maybe we were focused more on other threats, the one from the north, the one from Iran, and we thought the problem of Gaza, that's under control, right? And that was wrong. That was frankly wrong. And they took us by surprise. Look, October 7th is an intelligence mistake. We in Israel pride ourselves on having very, very good intelligence, right? We can find the Iranian nuclear scientists on the second floor on the apartment on the left side of the building, and we can put a missile in that building and just take out the scientists, and then no one else in the building is hurt. Or we can do that. And I'm proud that we can do it. We're a country, we pride ourselves on a country of James Bonds, right? And yet Israeli intelligence.
Better than James Bond. Yeah. James Bondstein.
And yet on October 7th, the job of intelligence is to give you warning before attack, that you will be prepared to meet that attack. That's the job of military intelligence. That's the job of the Shin Bet. Total failure. No excuses. Total failure. Second failure on October 7th is, of course, the military. Okay, they attack you. So get some helicopters into the air with gunships and start shooting them as they're crawling across the border, right? Get the army there. And the truth is, and I'm not proud to say this, but it took us about 3 days to get all the Hamas people out of Israel, right?
Yep.
They stormed across the border. They took different communities. They were holding hostages. The army was not in place to deal with the problems. And why wasn't the Air Force there? So if we didn't have enough soldiers on the ground, you get, helicopters up there, airplanes, you can total collapse once again, because we took their eye off the ball. And then, of course, the political leadership is responsible for all this. They're responsible. And the people of Israel will decide this year what they want to do with our political leadership. And we'll see what the elections turn out, and we can talk about that more. But there's no doubt there was failure built on failure, almost, as I say, a perfect storm.
Yeah. Well,
and there's no excuse for it. No excuse for it. The only thing that's even moderately comparable is in October 73, when Israel was surprised with a surprise attack. I'm old enough to remember. I'm sure you're not old enough to remember.
Well,
but
I was too.
There was this attack, a combined attack where the Syrians and the Egyptians attacked us by surprise. And all the signs were there that they had built up their forces. But somehow people didn't believe they would attack. And it was the same with Gaza. And it's inexcusable what we did. And now, we won't make the same mistake.
Yeah.
We'll keep our eye on the ball.
Yeah, Mark, so I want to stack on the perfect storm, the element that you didn't mention, but you alluded to deliberately or not deliberately, regarding the Yom Kippur War, is the fact that it was Simchas Torah and Shabbat. This is very normal for there to be a very low military presence anybody who's been to Israel on Shabbat, you see the trains and buses filled with soldiers going home for the holiday. Now, this is a policy that has worked now we're back to the math thing, right? So for about 50 years, right, between the Yom Kippur War and let's call it, for lack of a better term, nobody calls it this, but the Simchas Torah War, that, am I wrong in saying that the IDF routinely goes to sort of a skeleton crew, particularly on a very, very important holiday, not to mention Shabbat anyway? And let me just also make a note that because it's Ramadan now and everybody assumes, oh, well, Israel should respect Ramadan and not attack. I mean, the irony, again, I don't know how many times I could talk about the irony of the situation, that rather than respecting our holidays, that they use this as a whole, as an opportunity, because the IDF is on lower guard because it is a major holiday.
So I saw some investigations done, and it's true. Because we want to let soldiers go home and be with their families, especially on Jewish holidays. So you're right. There's more of a skeleton staff. And then that's where the intelligence community comes in, because if there is reports, if there's information that the enemy is about to attack, then of course you don't let people go home. But there was a report that I saw that was very damaging that says on Jewish holidays, the army isn't in a good position to fight a war, right? And so we have to now rethink about the whole way we let our soldiers out for weekends, right? You got to remember, and maybe this is difficult for your American viewers of this podcast, yeah? America has soldiers, they had soldiers in Germany, and they have soldiers in South Korea, and they have soldiers in Japan. And the idea that soldiers come home for the weekend is very strange, right? American sailors on their aircraft carriers are out for 6 months, right? And they might not see there, right? In Israel, it's a small country. The whole country, what is it? It's the size of, it's smaller than New Jersey, right? It's a small country. And it's, on Friday mornings, as the weekend, in Israel, the weekend is Friday and Saturday, you see all these buses leave military bases and soldiers go home for the weekend. And it's part of our national ethos. And these sort of things we now have to rethink, right? And
the other thing that particularly non-Jewish people don't understand is that phones are off on Shabbat. Many, not everybody, but many. Yeah.
But the sirens go off when there's an attack. But you're right. Religious Orthodox Jews don't use electronic media on Shabbat. It's supposed to be a day where they have they have a digital detox day. I heard once a chief rabbi say, right? They don't, but once if there's bad news, if there's a war, sirens go off. I'm not sure that's such a big issue, right? For
Mark, you said
military readiness.
But you said you heard quote unquote thunder, and then you went to TV. You didn't mention sirens. Did you hear sirens?
Where
were you? Where were you exactly?
I was in my house. I live in Modi'in.
Modi'in.
There weren't missiles fired at Modi'in. The missiles were fired in the south and at Tel Aviv. And so where I live, there weren't sirens.
Sure. So, but when you're talking about IDF mobilization, if people are offline, if they're doing their digital detox, and I'll argue that though it's primarily an Orthodox practice, it's not limited to Orthodox. A lot of people like to have a digital detox on Shabbat. But if you're in Modi'in, I mean, I personally know, not personally, but they're friends of a personal friend, soldiers from Modi'in who were killed in this war. The IDF and the reserves are all over the country. So when you say that they could rely on sirens, that's not enough if there are no sirens in your area and your phone is off.
So usually what happens, right? There's like Orthodox Jews who turn their phones off as a rule, they go to synagogue. And then all you need is one person to say something's going on, and everyone will check out to see, right? And there was countless stories of Orthodox soldiers who, on October 7th, they got into their cars and went to their units, right? And so, it's a small country, word of mouth. I'm not saying there aren't some people who didn't know, but I think the people who are in the military, who know that they can be called upon, they find out very quickly.
It was the Paul Revere model. But the other thing that I think that people don't understand is that when you are attacked in a surprise attack like this, and you don't have any sort of war plan in place, that we're seeing this play out in Iran, I'll say in Iran, in whatever, the mobilization going on, that it's taking America weeks to just mobilize, just to get the strike force out there, for example. Now, Israel, of course, is smaller. It's a much smaller conundrum, but even when you want to mobilize, even when you need to mobilize, you don't just snap your fingers and there's mobilization. You have to know where you're going, what you're doing, where are the people, what has to be done. You can't just send, we saw what happened with the reservists and police heroes who did just, and IDF who just ran into the fray. Many of them were murdered. Many of them were taken hostage because they were just doing whatever they could. There was no plan. It seems to me that the formal military has to have a thought, a plan, something in mind for something that was absolutely unheard of. Like whatever attacks that ever could have been imagined from Hamas, breaking thousands of people, breaking through the border fence, I don't think was on anybody's radar, even as a remote possibility. Even if there was intelligence saying, oh, it looks like they're mobilizing, who would have thought this to the extent that they were able to breach the border? And I believe that there was no contingency plan in place for the unthinkable.
And I want to tell you something, and it says something about what we got wrong. And maybe after this, we should talk a bit about what went right, because we shouldn't also just talk about what went wrong. Yes, but
absolutely.
There's this unit, it's called field intelligence. And there are the observers on the borders, who usually are young women doing their national service. So they're 19, 20, 21, on the border with Gaza, on the border with Lebanon. And they sit there with their equipment, right? All this electronic equipment, and their job is to scan the border. And these young soldiers, as I say, mostly female, they're sending their information up the chain of command. And they were reporting that Hamas is up to something.
Yes.
Hamas looks like it could attack. And through a combination of maybe macho sexism, through a simple thing of, what do these people further down the ranks know? We're the officer, I have all the information, they're exaggerating, right? I have the big picture, they only see what's happening, right? But they were ignored. And a lot of those women were killed. Some of them were taken hostage also on October 7th. And we have to get our act together. And I think we have one of the good things, all right? I don't want to say, but one of the good things to come out of October 7th is like a slap across the face. It was a wake-up call.
Yes.
It's a wake-up call that we have to take our enemies seriously and we can't fall asleep. And heaven forbid that we take our eye off the ball again, right?
Yes.
That's crucially important lesson of October 7th. And when someone says, I'm seeing Hamas and they look like they're out to attack, you don't say, I know better, okay? The other thing I say as an Israeli, as a proud Israeli, I say also, how do we look at our internal divisions, right? as much as we can argue about judicial reform or about this politics or that politics, ultimately we are both Israelis, and Hamas doesn't care what our political positions are. They're equal opportunity murderers, right?
Yes.
It's the same with Hezbollah. It's the same with Iran, right? They don't like us at all. And we have to always remember that even though I can argue politics with someone and we can disagree and we can vote for different parties, but ultimately we do have a common, to want to use a corny word, you can think of a word that's less corny, but we have a common destiny. And we should never forget that. And when we conduct our political debates, okay, let's have passionate disagreements. But let's always remember that we are fellow Israelis, we are ultimately brothers and sisters. And we have to know that when we argue, that we never forget that.
I agree. And that's why when I saw something very different than Ruthie, when I walked through the judicial reform protests and saw everybody waving the Israeli flags, what I saw is what you see, is that they understood that we may have our differences, but at the heart of it, we're all proud Israelis. Ruthie saw that very differently. But I think that when I go to Israel, especially from America, which is so fractious, particularly now, so polarized, I see one nation. And as I said to her, one nation under God, which is, really the ideal that we aim for in America, but we are straying further and further from. But yeah, so I do want to get into some of the good stuff about how the war was executed. But I think that honestly, for me, there was sort of a bigger issue that came out of the war. When I say bigger, I mean really even bigger in scope, and I think bigger in intention. But how long after October 7th? I mean, maybe you even thought it after 6:29 or 9:30 or whenever you found out about it that morning, that you realized that rabid anti-Semitism was about to go mainstream.
So it's true. That's one of the shocks. That's one of the bad pieces of news since October 7th, which is this, how do we say, this cacophony of anti-Semitism across the world, not in America, in Canada, in Australia, where I was born, in Western Europe. Obviously, there's always been anti-Semitism very strong in places like Gaza, in places like Iran, but you saw this, right? And if we can talk about this for a moment, I want to say a few things. Number one, I think there are a few very comfortable and well, comfortable is probably the best word, but nice myths about anti-Semitism. It's very convenient to believe that all the anti-Semites are the uncultured, the unwashed, the uneducated. And all we have to do is just tell them the truth, and they'll understand, that Jews are good people, and there's no reason to hate us. And it's a myth. It's a comfortable myth, because if anti-Semitism is a result of people being unwashed, uncultured, they're all skinheads with tattoos, right? Right, who never finished elementary school, or in Britain you say primary school, right? But it's not true. It was never true. Now we know it's not true today, because we see the bastions of hating the Jewish state and hating Jews is often university campuses, right? Which are the high educated people. And
Not just universities, but the most prestigious universities are where it's the worst. People who should know better if they cared about facts and history, but go on.
But it's not new.
Yeah.
Nazism was very, very popular on German universities in the 1920s and the 1930s. Very popular amongst German educated elites. Very popular Nazism. And the idea is that if you're educated, you're not going to be anti-Semitic. Some of the most educated people in the world were anti-Semitic. Voltaire, one of the fathers of the French Enlightenment, right? Anti-Semitic. Dostoevsky, one of the fathers, of modern Russian literature. No one doubts Dostoevsky's contribution to humanity. Anti-Semitic. Even Shakespeare, and there's that whole argument about the Merchant of Venice. Was he just reflecting the anti-Semitic period, or was he himself? And it doesn't matter. But the whole idea that educated people, cultured people can't be anti-Semitic, all we have to do is tell them the truth. Let's educate them and they won't be anti-Semitic. It's no. Unfortunately, the truth is anti-Semitism isn't, sorry, education is not an inoculation. It's not a vaccine against anti-Semitism. I mean, you consider, you mentioned before, people today on the woke right and the woke left in America can be very, very anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, and they're very educated people. You don't deny that they are, cultural people. They make movies, they write plays, they write for newspapers, they are men and women of letters, yes, and yet they can be anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
And if you think of all the money the Jewish community has put over the years into, interfaith dialogue, and is it worth anything? I'm asking a serious question.
Well, I mean, in the answer, Mark, I have very mixed feelings about that, because on one hand, I think it is integral, and I've had many allies on my show, mostly Muslim and Christian. I had, Ayub Kara, who's also Druze. And so I will argue, I've had Coleman Hughes. I mean, we do have allies, and I do believe that outreach does make a difference. But at the same time, it reminds me of being in junior high school and begging the cool kids to be my friend. Like the fact that we as Jews are marginalized on the intersectional stage that the whole world is like parading across, in and of itself is a tragedy. So the outreach shouldn't be necessary, but it is. And does it make a difference? Yes, but does it make a big difference? I'm not sure. I think that obviously we can't deal with the people on the margins, the people who have already, decided no matter what that we eat dead Palestinian babies, which tastes good with the side of gefilte fish and all. But
can I say something?
Yeah.
I'll give you. You talked about being in high school and one of the cool kids being your friend. I'll give you my personal association with this. Okay.
Yeah.
Me and my siblings a few years back went to Magdeburg, Germany, where my father was born. Okay. He was born there in 1931.
Wow.
And my father was named after his uncle, my grandfather's older brother, who died in the First World War fighting for Kaiser Wilhelm and the German Empire. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And in Magdeburg, which is a medium-sized or even a smaller-sized German city, there's a Jewish cemetery that somehow survived the war. And there's this monument built in the middle of the Jewish cemetery by the Magdeburg Jewish community with the names of all the Jews in Magdeburg who fought and died for Germany in the First World War. Yeah. Okay. And my father's name is there because the uncle who my father is named after is on the wall, Martin Freiberg, right? And he's one of a whole group of them. Now, were the German Jews proud, or they thought they were proud Germans? I'm sure they were. And I think also part of it was the Jewish community of Magdeburg wanted to tell the non-Jewish Magdeburg people that we are good citizens. We've also paid a price in the terrible Great War and all this and so. Yep. And did it help them?
Nor should they have to prove it.
But did it help them?
No.
I think there's a truth there that cannot be ignored. And some people say, right, anti-Semitism, and books have been written about this by people much smarter than me, right? But they say anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred.
Yes.
And that anti-Semitism has the ability to continue being relevant to new generation in different countries to different people, right? So in the past, people hated the Jews because, I don't know, because we killed Jesus. And then people hated Jews because we refused to accept Muhammad's mission. And then people were, when Europe became more secular, people hated Jews because of our race. That was scientific. That's anti-Semitism. The term comes from a fellow called Wilhelm Marr in the 19th century of Germany, who was writing about scientific anti-Semitism, right? And then, for left-wingers, Jews are all Rothschild. We're all capitalists exploiting the people, right? And for right-wingers, the Jews are all Trotsky, we're all Bolsheviks, we're all communists who want to undermine society, right? And it's like, that's the thing about anti-Semitism, its ability to, I'll probably mispronounce this word, you will correct me, to metamorphosize, to change and to grow and to be relevant in different places and different societies and to different people. I mean, ultimately, someone on the far progressive left and someone on the far radical ultra right, they don't have a lot in common, right?
They have one thing in common. Yeah.
Exactly. Correct. They have one thing in common.
Well,
And
it's a
so I would
shape-shifting
say to you,
psychosis.
I would say to you, so you can get very depressed and you can say, you know, anti-Semitism is there. It's been there. Maybe it took a bit of a holiday after the Holocaust, but it came back, right? Why did it come back after October 7th? It's like anti-Semitism rose across the world, including in the United States of America, after Hitler came to power in Germany in 1933. Because suddenly it became powerful and it, you know, and it grew. And that's why I think the explosion of anti-Semitism after October 7th isn't about Israel's response. It's about the success in killing Jews. Just as Hitler gave inspiration to anti-Semites around the world, so too Hamas gave inspiration to anti-Semites around the whole world. That's what it's all about. And so you can get very depressed and say, you know, some things don't change. But here I want to say to you what I believe. This is my belief system. Is something very important has changed. The Jewish people have changed. Because if in the past we were defenseless and stateless, homeless,
Right.
begging other people to protect us, please, Mr. Churchill, please, Mr. Roosevelt, bomb Auschwitz, stop the extermination, right? Today, thank goodness, yeah, we are no longer stateless. We're no longer homeless. We have a country that prioritizes Jewish life. And any Jew, it's in our constitution, any Jew who wants to come to this country for whatever reason, but especially if they're fleeing discrimination, they're fleeing violence, right? Oppression. They have a right under Israeli law to Israeli citizenship. I think we're the only country. Tell me, I mean, in America, I can apply to be an American citizen, but I don't have a right to become an American citizen, right? But in Israel, any Jew born abroad has a right to be an Israeli. And if the Israeli government doesn't want to give them citizenship, you have to go through the whole courts, and the Israeli government has to decide. There was the famous story with Meyer Lansky, the Jewish American gangster in the 1960s, right? But that is the exception to the rule. And we have a country now that will bomb the camps and will bomb the bomb factories in Iran, right? That will stand up for Jewish communities. So when people say nothing's changed, no, the Jews have changed. Maybe the anti-Semites haven't changed, but the Jews have changed. We will protect ourselves. We will defend ourselves. There is a Jewish homeland. And if all these anti-Semites, if anti-Semitism is now very fashionable in Western countries, right? Okay. So we will protect ourselves. We will defend ourselves.
Okay. So let me ask you this, Mark. What do you think was the primary goal of October 7th? Do you think it was the massacre or the delegitimization campaign that they launched immediately? I mean, immediately after, and was obviously already in place.
So when I worked for Netanyahu, when I worked for him for a couple of years, he had this line, which I think is historically very correct. He would say it doesn't start with the murder of Jews. It always started with defamation, with delegitimization. In other words, you say the Jews are killing Christian children to bake matzah, right, for their blood. And then you can kill them. Or the Jews are spreading the plague and the Black Death, and then we can kill them, right?
Right.
And so delegitimization is part of creating a climate where it's legitimate to kill Jews. Look, where I grew up in Australia, right? The Australian Jewish community was basically, I mean, some Australian Jews can point back to, 200 years, and they came with the convicts here. Australia was originally a penal colony for white people. But the big boost the Australian Jewish community got was the post-war, Second World War immigration, where Jews came to rebuild their lives. And a lot of Jews came to Australia because it was the furthest place from Europe, and Europe was one big graveyard. They lost their families, they lost their communities. And if you're going to start a new life, and Australia was letting them in, they didn't let them in before the war so much, but after the war, they let Jewish refugees in. If anti-Semitism in Australia has gone out of control, right? We saw what happened at Bondi. Who would have thought in Australia?
Right.
What's going on here? And but it's also a wake-up call.
Yeah.
Maybe the Australian Jews, maybe American Jews, maybe Canadian Jews, maybe British Jews who've also been going through a tough time. Maybe they were being deluded, living in some sort of, fake
Clearly. Yeah.
fake reality.
Clearly. Well, I mean, so we're seeing an anti-Semitism or Jew hatred, different people like different terms across the globe, that I would say is even more nefarious than what we saw in World War II, because it was largely limited to Europe back then. I'm not saying that there wasn't rabid anti-Semitism. I mean, there was, of course, in America and other places, but it hadn't taken over the entire nation. It was limited to, an event at Madison Square Garden, or, Father Coughlin, or a person, but it wasn't a mass movement across the whole entire world the way that it is now in places, where Jews aren't even relevant, where they don't, nor is Israel, but they just got the memo. Thanks to social media, AI, and bots, the Islamists have been insanely successful in turning the world against Israel and the Jewish people. And I say the Islamists, but obviously that's with the natural buy-in of the anti-Semites that already existed, right? Like the neo-Nazis, the KKK, we call them whoever you want. But what worries me is because social media, AI, and bots are going nowhere, that this campaign was extraordinarily deliberate, that they bet on the fact that if they live streamed the brutal massacre of Jews on October 7th, people would cheer them on, and they did. I'm wondering, in all honesty, like, do you think that this social media global campaign to delegitimize the Jews is, when I say ever, I don't mean this rhetorically, I mean this quite literally. Do you think it's ever going to relent at this point, or have we hit the point of no return?
So anti-Semites have always used modern technology to propagate their hatred, right? The printing press, right? All these leaflets that were put out in Germany and in France, right? And newspapers, there were anti-Semitic newspapers. And then when the radio came, all of Hitler's speeches were put on broadcast on the radio to the world, right? So the idea that they wouldn't use modern technology to put out their hate, of course, that's standard behavior for anti-Semites, right? Of course they would.
Of course.
So we shouldn't be surprised. Now, I don't claim to be an expert on social media. You probably understand it much more than me. But that there's anti-Semitism on social media shouldn't surprise anyone. And what is the problem? Does that give it a legitimacy?
I don't think it's just anti-Semitism, Mark. I think this is a broad and very deliberate campaign. I mean, again, like the use of bots shows that there is an aggressive nature that has a deliberate function to undercut Jewish voices and to put lies into the world on a massive scale. Now the previous technologies were very limited in their scope. You could only put so many articles in a newspaper or so many leaflets, and you can't force people to read them, as opposed to social media, where 25% of the world or more is on Facebook, and it's just going to show up. You're just going to see it. It's just all on your feed, and it just keeps coming. And then you've got Tucker Carlson getting 2 million views in an hour of smearing.
But to be fair, I'm not minimizing anything you're saying, but you mentioned Father Coughlin in the 1930s, talking about the Jews and Roosevelt and Jewish communists and so forth. I mean, he used the radio and he had millions of listeners too.
The question is, when does it end?
Okay, so maybe it doesn't.
That's my question.
But I'm
Because
saying,
keep in mind,
yeah.
we're 4 months into a ceasefire that most of the world assumes meant the end of the war, and yet the rhetoric continues to scale up.
Well, here, once again, I'd say to you, right? It's just that anti-Semitism skyrocketed after Hitler came to power in Germany.
Yeah.
Anti-Semitism skyrocketed after October 7th, 2023. And it's the stuff you read online, but it's also the violence, the torching of synagogues, the physical abuse, murder, as we saw in Australia and in Britain and in other countries in the United States, right?
Yeah.
And it maybe, once again, this is a new reality. Yeah. And we have to ask the following, right? I've got a friend who's the ambassador in a leading European country, and we were talking. And he said, you know what the problem is? And tell me what you think about this. He says, the anti-Semitism of the traditional, far right. Yeah, you said before, neo-Nazis, Ku Klux Klan, those sort. He said there are legal tools to deal with that, right? And he said
That's
the
right.
anti-Semitism and the hatred of the Islamists, because of 9/11 and all things, there's actually quite good legislation to deal, a lot of it's to do with counterterrorism, to deal with the Islamists, right? He said, but the anti-Semitism of the far left, because they use a language that's not the same as, they use the language of freedom, and Nazis also use language of freedom, right? But there, our legislation is much less effective. Now, I saw there was a proposal in France, of all places.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think people are becoming more and more aware, right, of that we have to deal with the anti-Semitism of the far left.
Yes.
And as you said, it's like a horseshoe. Ultimately, they get very, very close to the far right.
The problem is you can't outlaw hate, right? I could say I'm going to arrest you for writing a mean tweet, which, whatever they do in England, I don't necessarily agree with that either. But at the same time, I can't stop your feelings. I can't stop what you say to your students in school or to your grandchildren or to your grandparents or to your friends. I can't control what you spray paint on a sidewalk in the middle of the night when no one's looking. I can't control any of that stuff. And so, we could legislate ourselves as much as we want into, whatever, a nice box where everybody is friends and everybody accepts each other and is I hate the word tolerant because it's so feckless, but that tolerates everybody. But ultimately, the sentiments continue to fester, and I think that this is the real problem.
Can I tell you also what is the issue? You said quite correctly, you can't legislate against hatred, right? And one of the problems with social media is, two anti-Semites would sit in a bar and they'd say the Jews are terrible, we got to kill them, right? Now they're saying it to each other on Twitter, I should say on X, shouldn't I, or on Facebook or on Instagram, and then everyone is seeing it. So they have a larger megaphone in many ways. That's and right. Maybe that's an issue. Can I talk about the good news though? Because otherwise everyone will get very depressed.
That was
so the good news is,
yes.
I believe this very strongly, yes?
Okay.
Number one, if you compare Israel situation on October 6th, the day before the attack, 2023, to the situation today, there's no doubt that the Jewish state is in a better geopolitical strategic situation, okay? Hamas is a shadow of its former self. We haven't totally finished the job, but we will, right? There's changes in Lebanon, the changes in Syria, the war against Iran, and we don't know what's going to happen in the next few days or weeks, yes? But there's no doubt that Israel came out of the abyss because on October 7th, we were at the lowest of the low. And not only did we bounce back, we've made changes. Israel today is stronger than ever before, all right? And there's no doubt today that as a Jewish state, we are stronger, we are safer, right? We paid prices for this, a huge national effort, right? Many soldiers, were in combat. Some of them died. Some of them been injured, either psychologically or physically, right? But we have changed the reality around us. And Israel is the preeminent political, military power of the region. And secondly, despite all what we've been through over the last 2.5 years, there's no doubt that Israel continues as a country to be an amazing success story. And you saw that when you were here, right? The Israelis are doing their high-tech revolution and the whole world wants to be part of Israeli technology, yes. Israel is a country which is a good country to live in, right? We have a good quality of life. We are building and the country is growing economically, demographically. We're increasingly a prosperous country, right? There are many things going for this country. In fact, you could argue, and I'm not putting all the problems aside, everything we said up until now when we were doing the pessimistic stage of our discussion, right? It's all true. But there's also the glass that half full. In many ways, Israel is uniquely positioned to succeed in the 21st century because we are an innovation society. We're a high-tech innovation society. We're on the cutting edge of technological development and technological innovation. I remember, and I'm showing my age, I was in my early teens during the Yom Kippur War, and then there was something that was called the Arab oil embargo, right? And the Arab oil producers stopped selling oil to the whole world, and all these countries had to be anti-Israel. And there was even fear that because America needed Middle Eastern oil, that America would turn against us too, right? Because the whole world needed Arab oil. And I remember thinking as this young teen, Israel, how can we overcome this, right? They've got this product that the whole world needs, and everyone's going to support the Arabs because everyone needs the oil. The Japanese, anti-Israel. Why are the Japanese anti-Israel? Because they needed Arab oil, right? The French and the British, when the Americans sent us military supplies during the Yom Kippur War, the Russians, the Soviets were sending them to the Arabs. The Americans wanted to balance it out. And Nixon and Kissinger organized for supplies to come to Israel. The Europeans didn't allow the planes to land on their shore, on their airfields, even on American airfields on their territory. Why? Not because they hated us, but because of the oil.
That's right.
I would ask you, and tell me what you think about this. This is another, one of my ideas. Is it possible that in the 21st century, Israel has the oil? Now, I'm not talking about the gas that we have in the Eastern Mediterranean, right? I'm not talking about real fossil fuel. But if the 21st century economy is going to be driven by technology, and we know it is, and Israel is on the cutting edge of so much technology, right? Maybe everyone else should start worrying because Israel is a technological superpower. And are we not in a unique position to succeed and be strong technologically and economically in the 21st century? And countries will want to be nice to us because it'll be in their interest to be nice to us.
Yes, we have the oil. And yes, we're seeing that already. We're seeing record-breaking deals of purchases of Israeli tech companies, particularly in cybersecurity. And also, I'd like to stack on that, Mark, that the other barrel of oil that Israel has is the intelligence that saves really the entire Western civilization from terrorist attacks, that helps to protect their own citizens. This is intelligence that, and not to mention whatever. So we've got the tech, the water tech, the medical tech, the intelligence, the military tech, all the tech. But here's the thing, Mark, is that we have all these countries in the UN who are going to vote against Israel every single time, no matter the resolution, including some allies, because it fits their base. And Israel is like, yeah, but we'll give you all this good stuff anyway, all this stuff that's going to save, your people in the hospitals, that's going to save your people from terror, that's going to save your people by keeping your economy afloat, that's going to, do all these things for your country. While the same countries are yelling, BDS, BDS, Israel needs to start saying, you want our stuff? Let's make a deal. Show us that you're allies. We're not asking you for any special favors, but don't vote for terrorists in the United Nations. Don't vote for a Palestinian state when you know that it is literally would be the death knell of our country. Don't continue to posture against our nation and then beg us for our intelligence and our oil.
I agree with that. I think we have to leverage our new friends, and we have to be maybe tough with the people that we don't want to be,
Could you repeat that sentence because you froze?
Back on. I said we have to leverage. I've gone off.
Sort of.
Can you hear now?
Sort of.
So what should I do?
No. I think I could hear you now. Your screen is like on some sort of.
Okay, you're coming in fine on my end.
Oh, now I got you. You're back in.
I said Israel. I agree with you that Israel should leverage.
Yes.
Its technological prowess, right? I agree with that. Can I tell you something? Because we're coming to the end of our time, and I wanted to say to you something. I was recently on holiday in Finland, okay?
Yes.
And I've never been to Finland before, and I'd never been in such a cold country before.
Right.
And it was very interesting for me. But Finland is very interesting because Finland, they do the World Happiness Index, and Finland for years comes out #1, all right? Now, why do I mention this? And I think I understand now today after being there why Finland does so well, yeah? But Israel's always in the top 10.
That's right.
And in many ways that Israel, and it's the UN survey, yes? And the UN never has anything nice to say about Israel, for obvious reasons, that before. But why is it that in the UN's happiness index, Israel consistently controls the world? Because you would argue, I mean, it's counterintuitive because Israelis have many reasons not to be happy. We've got Hamas in the south and Hezbollah in the north and Iran over the frontier, and young Israelis have to do 2-3 years of their lives in compulsory national service, right? And because of the military expense, we've got higher taxes, right? And Israelis drive crazy on the streets, and there are all these reasons why we shouldn't be a happy country.
Right.
And I didn't talk about the threat of terrorism. And yet, according to the UN, we're happier than Canada, we're happier than the United States, we're happier than Italy, we're happier than Greece, we're happier than the United Kingdom. What have we got going? According to, what is Israel's secret of success? And I would argue that there's something in Israel which is a hybrid. That on one hand, we're a modern, pluralist, technological, democratic, pluralistic society with all the advantages of living in a modern, Western, political, pluralist,
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, there's a sense of community and purpose and family and of being, a sense of belonging. And it's a winning combination. And you see that in the number of children we have in Israel, which is much higher than any other Western country. If I'm not mistaken, it's higher than any other Western country.
Yes.
And I'll give you a metaphor for it, okay? In Israel, you have to go to your mother on a Friday night, right? It's a sin.
Right.
Families get together. The joke that Israelis tell about Americans, and you will tell me if this is, Americans see their children twice a year on Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? Israelis, it's one of the reasons we talk about the army falling apart on weekends.
Right.
Families get together. If you don't go to your mother on a Friday night, you better have a good excuse, right? It's part of the culture, family. And the family is a support group. And the family, is belonging. And that's also your community. And it's part of being part of a country and a society, right? All those young Israeli soldiers, right, who were in battle now over the last 2.5 years, let's be frank. Everyone in a combat unit is a de facto volunteer because no one, if you say my back is sore, I've got psychological problems, they won't put you in a combat unit. They're all there because it's part of them doing their bit for the country and to prove themselves that they can do it, right? A combination of wanting to do something for others and also to prove yourself, yeah?
Yeah.
But to use my metaphor about the Friday night and
Yes.
this combination between belonging and tradition and between Western, pluralist, democratic, liberal, right? Let's say you're gay and you've got a gay partner. You have to bring the gay partner on a Friday night too, because I want to meet your gay partner. In other words, it's Jewish, but Jewish 21st century. And I think that's the secret of Israel's success. I think that's why we're happy, because having community and having family and having a society where there's sort of meaning, together with the pluralism and the democracy and entrepreneurship and the individualism, I think in Israel we're doing something, maybe accidentally. I don't know if it was by design, yeah? But we're doing something that seems to work. And if the UN says consistently that we're one of the 10 most happy countries in the world, and once again, if the UN says something nice about Israel, it has to be true.
That's right. I completely agree, Mark. I have a different view on why Israel is so happy, and this is actually a theory that I've had since the first time I came to Israel many years ago, well before October 7th, which is that in America, we say all the time, in Nobody Does, live each day as if it were your last. And I think that is a sentiment that we sort of offer flippantly in theory, but that Israelis have to live in reality, given the threats onto every border and the, the knowledge that honestly, you don't know if the day is your last, in a way that the rest of the world does not function on that level. And so you always, like, the joy in Israel, it's so different than anything that you see anywhere. The joie de vivre, not just the joy, but like just the way that everybody squeezes every minute of life out of life, that you walk down the Tayela in the middle of the night and there's like all these people playing volleyball on the beach and it's literally midnight. And it's just like, yeah, well, we're alive. Let's do this thing. So
I remember, I have my own story. I remember I was at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. as a junior diplomat. And after 5 years, we came back. And the foreign ministry, until the house was ready, the apartment was ready to move into, they put us up in a hotel, and the hotel was right by the beach. And I remember looking outside the window of my hotel. They didn't give us a beach, with a beach view. We got the view the other way because the foreign ministry gave us the cheaper room because it was taxpayer money. And I remember looking at the restaurants on Yarkon Street and people queuing up at 10 at night to go into a restaurant.
yes.
And it was a weekday. I said, what's going on in this country? Right? What's going on? Why are people out there vibrant? I think what you're saying is also that. I've known as well.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I have 100 billion more questions that I'm going to skip over because you've been already very generous with your time. And I know you gave me an hour and a half. We're now at 140. So I am going to just ask one more, just if you could indulge me, one more answer. What does Am Yisrael Chai mean to you?
It means, look, we can't be ostriches and put our head in the sands, right? There are very serious threats that we have to deal with. And you don't solve them by ignoring them, okay? And got to keep our eye on our ball and we got to look at the threats. But that should never blind us to what's going on good, right? And there's no doubt that Israel, objectively, is an amazing, a success story. The way Israel has built, a society, the rebirth of the Hebrew language, the success story of the Israeli economy, the sort of society we built with all our problems, yeah, that this is, of all the revolutions, right, of the 20th century, right? There was the Russian Revolution and there was the Chinese Revolution. So the Zionist Revolution is in many ways the most successful revolution. And we are part of something here that is a going concern that I think we can all be proud of. Doesn't mean we can't make improvements. I'm not saying, there's not problems here that we have to fix, right? But on the whole, if you look at the big picture, we can be very proud of it. And I want to say one last thing. I now have grandchildren. Yeah, I'm old, not like you. I have My father, as I said before, was born in Magdeburg, Germany in 1931. My youngest grandchild was born 4 years ago in Israel, okay? What is the world that she was born into with all our problems? What was the world that my father was born into? And you should have no doubt that the trajectory that we're on as a Jewish people is a positive trajectory, that things are getting better, and that though we've had our terrible times on October 7th, we talk about that a lot on this show, yeah? That should not blind us to the fact that the overall trajectory is just so positive that we should smile and know that there are things that we can be very, very truly grateful for.
The last words of the Yoga of War podcast take my breath away. Mark, thank you so much for spending this time with me. It's just been such a pleasure to talk with you, and I appreciate your time. And more than anything, let me just say, Am Yisrael Chai.
Am Yisrael Chai. Look after yourself.
I'm doing my best. You too.